What's up, River Church? My name is Matt, and I'm the youth pastor if you haven't met me before. So I typically hang out with the high school and junior high students on Wednesday nights, but now you've got me doing the announcements on Sunday morning from your home or wherever you're watching this. So, what's up? We've got a couple announcements for you guys this week. The first one is that our Wednesday night groups are winding down, but you can still join those. We are having a summer kickoff for our small groups, which is really kind of an end of the year small groups thing. That is going to be May 19th. We have a celebration. It's May 19th, starts at 6:30. We're doing a cookout with burgers, hot dogs. It's going to be a great time. You should come. And then our ministry, our men's group, is still meeting on Tuesdays at 6 a.m. They're going through Exodus chapter 2 right now, and I've heard that the coffee is okay and the friends are a lot better. We have a summer course coming up. It's an apologetics course, so it goes through a lot of the big questions that people have with the faith, with Christianity. So that's going to be on Sunday mornings over the summer. Stay tuned for more information about that. There's also the women's luncheon, not the women's lunch. It's much fancier than that, apparently, which is Tuesday, May 4th at 11:30. If you want details, email office@riverabilene.com. And then before May 4th, we have May 3rd, which is a National Day of Prayer. So we're going to be, no, May 3rd is a day of prayer for our church that we'll all be praying through. Some more information follow on that. And then May 6th is actually the National Day of Prayer. So it's a big Abilene-wide, multiple churches event at the Everman Park downtown at 12:15 on May 6th, where we're going to pray together for a few minutes and then walk downtown. Otherwise, later on in the summer, June 26th is our all-church retreat. There's going to be a lot of family events at that. June 26th, you don't want to miss it. Also, there are, if you want to give to support any of the ministries going on at the River, you can give via text, online, or if you're in person at our offering plates around the sanctuary. So that wraps up our announcements for this week. I want to ask you guys, as you're watching this, maybe talk to a friend next to you, a family member, ask them this question. What is one thing that made you mad this last week? You don't have to pick something super deep. It could be just a pet peeve that you have. However much you want to do, one thing that made you mad this week.
And as the Spirit was moving over the water, Spirit, come move over us. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. And as the Spirit was moving over the water, Spirit, come move over us. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. So calm down. Spirit, when you move, you make my heart pound. When you fill the room, you're here and I know you're moving. I'm here and I know you will fill me. Calm down. Spirit, when you move, you make my heart pound. When you fill the room, you're here and I know you are moving. I'm here and I know you will fill me. As the Spirit was moving, and as the Spirit was moving over the water, Spirit, come move over us. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. And as the Spirit was moving over the water, Spirit, come move over us. Come rest on us. Come rest on fire and wind. Oh, fire and wind, come and do rest on us. You're all we want. You're all we want. And Holy Spirit, come rest on us. You're all we want. You're all we want. Come on, lift your voice. And Holy Spirit, come rest on us. You're all we want. And you're all we want. And Holy Spirit, come rest on us. You're all we want. You're all we want. So calm down, Spirit, when you move, you make my heart pound. When you fill the room, you're here and I know you are moving. I'm here and I know you will fill me. Calm down, Spirit, when you move, you make my heart pound. When you fill the room, you're here and I know you are moving. I'm here and I know you will fill me. Oh, you come fill us, Lord. Come and fill us, Lord. Oh. So calm down, Spirit, when you move, you make my heart pound. When you fill the room, you're here and I know you are moving. And I'm here and I know you will fill me. Calm down, Spirit, when you move, you make my heart pound. When you fill the room, you're here and I know you are moving. I'm here and I know you will fill me. Oh, fill us afresh, oh God. Holy Spirit, come rest on us. You're all we want, and you're all we want. And Holy Spirit, come and rest on us, 'cause you're all we want. You're all we want.
Let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, he is my song. And you are good, good. Oh, you are good, you're good. Oh, you are good, you're good. Oh, you are good, you're good. Oh, let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, he is
never gonna let me down. Come on, church. You're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down. And you're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down. Oh, you're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down. 'Cause you are good. You're good. Oh, you are good. So good. Oh, and you are good. You're good. Oh, you are good. You're good. Oh, and you're never gonna let. And you're never gonna let me down. 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 Oh, 'cause you are good. Good. Oh, tell him he's good, church. Good. So good. Oh, and you are good. Good. Oh, you are good. Good. Oh.
When the night is holding on to me, God is holding on. And when the night is holding on to me, God is holding on.
Come on.
So much has changed since last Easter. The world has been shaken. Life has been disrupted. What we once called normal seems like it may never return. It's been easy to be discouraged, to lose hope, to feel the foundations of our faith begin to crumble. It's hard to keep our feet planted when the ground beneath feels like shifting sand. Now more than ever, we need to stand on the truth of Easter, a day which changed our eternity, changed our world forever. Death was defeated by life. Sin was consumed by mercy. The grave was swallowed up by victory. See, even in the darkest of moments, the love of Jesus could not be stopped. His faithfulness could not be broken. And when the dust settled, Jesus, he stood alive and victorious. Today, may we remember the truth of Easter, the power of the resurrection, and the promise of eternity. Yes, the world has been shaken, but the grave, it's still empty. And Jesus, he's still risen.
What's up, River Church? Once again, my name is Matt, and if you're wondering what's going on with the background, we are currently in the youth building. So, welcome to being a high school student for the week. You probably also noticed that I am not Pastor David. I'm a little bit shorter, I have a little bit more hair, his beard is better than mine. There are some other differences that maybe I'm a little self-conscious about, but it is fine. And what I wanted to let you guys know this week is that I'm filling in while Pastor David is out of town, and I have an answer to that same question that I asked you. So we're talking about things that make us mad, something that made you mad last week. I'll share an example that you might think is lighthearted, but it's definitely not. There is a creature living in my bedroom wall, right behind my head. When my wife Megan and I went to sleep, this is probably about 2 months ago at this point, we heard this rustling, and it sounded like something was trying to eat its way through the wall. And that something was a squirrel. And we ended up sleeping in the living room that night because it just got so loud. And we learned to peacefully coexist with this squirrel because, he generally goes to sleep before we do when the sun is going down. He wakes up about when we wake up. It's not a huge deal. But after Jeremy woke up from hibernation about 2 weeks ago, he's been super loud. And yes, I did call the squirrel Jeremy. We gave him a name, not because I love him or because I want him to stick around, but because I wanted something to yell when I heard Jeremy scratching on the wall. And I'm normally a very just even keel, peaceful, happy-go-lucky guy, but I have imagined potentially what it would be like to squeeze this squirrel like a little stuffed animal where the eyes kind of pop out, And I know it's a gruesome image, but it's honestly warranted. I went to Lowe's to pick up some fox urine to try to take care of Jeremy, and that was a really gross experience. Anyway, you don't need to hear any more about Jeremy, but the reason I'm telling that story is because we all have things in our lives that make us mad. And when it's a squirrel, it's kind of funny to talk about. But when there's a situation in your life where you get mad and you want to respond by hurting someone or with anger, that often is not funny when it destroys our relationships. So you may have a family member that you haven't seen in a long time because of something you said that you can't take back. Or maybe you're a student and you said something to your teacher that you couldn't take back and you ended up getting consequences because of that. Or maybe you're on a team and you're playing basketball or something and you do, right after the whistle, you stomp on the guy's foot or whatever. I think all of us have had moments where we've wanted to respond in anger by hurting someone. I think it's a natural response. It's something that can hurt not just our family relationships, but our friendships and our communities. I think that today, many of us realize that we are living in a cloud of anger and hate. If you spend any time on social media, you realize that often people's first reaction to anything that goes on, maybe rightly so in the case of injustice or different things, is anger. And I think that the difficulty for us is going to be, and this is what we're talking about this week, is going to be choosing healing over hurting. So if you've been following us over the past couple weeks since Easter, we've been talking about how Jesus frees us from things, how the work of Jesus and what he's done on the cross and through his resurrection can give us a new life in the future and can forgive us for the mistakes that we've made in the past, for the self-destructive behavior that we have in the present. But Jesus doesn't just free us from things, he frees us for things, frees us to things. And so we're talking about how the example of Jesus and the work of Jesus can give us life transformation in the present. This week, we're talking about what it looks like for us to choose healing over hurting. And we're not the first people, apparently, to deal with anger. I want to take us back to a scene happened in a garden in first century Palestine about 2,000 years ago. If you guys want to open up with me to Matthew chapter 26, verse 47. So I'll set the scene for us really quickly. So Jesus is with his core group of disciples who have followed him for over about 2.5 years at this point, 2.5 to 3 years. They followed him around, and they've lived with him. They've given up their families, some of them. They've given up their occupations because they believe in Jesus and his mission, that he's going to be the new king of Israel. But what they don't understand is that Jesus is not trying to bring a revolution in the way that they expect him to, but instead, he has something so much bigger in mind. So this moment, it's in the middle of the night. It's super dark. The disciples have eaten a big meal together hours beforehand. They can't stay awake. And then suddenly, one follower of Jesus, who is like a brother to these men who are standing there with him, comes up with this crowd of people who are armed. And this is the response. So if you check out verse 47 with me, Matthew chapter 26, verse 47. So this is the scene in the garden. Jesus says, or the narrative says, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, someone who was like a brother. With him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Verse 48, now the betrayer had arranged a signal with him. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him. So why are they showing up at night? Well, Jesus was a really popular person. He drew all kinds of crowds to hear his teaching. And so the religious leaders of the day who clashed with Jesus because Jesus was undermining the Torah and the temple and all these institutions that they used to have power over the people, when they're clashing with Jesus, they don't want to arrest him publicly because they don't want potentially to have a riot. And so they come at night and they pay one of Jesus' followers to lead them to go find where he hangs out and where he spends the night so they can arrest him quietly. And the kiss thing is weird for us in this century because we don't greet each other with kisses. Like, most of us don't live in France. That's not our thing. But a kiss is like a handshake in the ancient world. It's a symbol of trust, ironically. And so Judas comes up to betray Jesus, and it's like someone stabbing your back while they shake your hand. It is all too much for his disciples to take. And so this is what happened. Jesus replies, verse 50, Jesus replied, do what you came for, friend. He still chooses to call Judas a friend, even though he's his enemy. Jesus did that with all of us as well. Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. With that, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. We're going to hang out here for a bit. So the Gospel of John identifies this disciple who has a sword and cuts off one of the high priest's servant's ears. When they come to arrest Jesus, he identifies him as Peter. And Peter at this point would have been so frustrated. Jesus is supposed to overthrow the Romans who've been taxing Israel to the point where people are so poor, they're living day to day, and they don't know where their next meal is going to come from. Jesus is supposed to fix that. And Peter's been following Jesus this whole time, and Jesus has been trying to communicate to Peter, hey, I am going to overcome the evil in the world by suffering and dying, not by fighting it with violence. And so that becomes this moment for Peter where it's all collapsing. He has no idea what's going on, but he knows that the king of the world getting arrested is not what's supposed to happen. And so Peter's first response is violence. And do this if you're sitting next to someone. So Peter is probably right-handed. People typically were not allowed to be left-handed in the ancient world. So you use your right hand, face someone who's next to you, and cut off their right ear. Did you catch that? What motion did you have to make to do that? Yeah, you had to go across the body. It would seem Peter is trying to give this servant the last haircut he's ever going to get. This is a lethal swing. And maybe it's dark and Peter's just swinging at whoever is there. But what's the point? The point is that when Peter gets mad, his first response is violence. And it's violence toward the person who's not even to blame. Because don't forget, these are just the fall guys. These are just servants who are sent. Who should Peter really be swinging his sword at? He should be swinging his sword at the chief priests who sent them. He should be swinging his sword at the Roman tax collectors who've been oppressing the people. He should be swinging his sword at the heart of the empire that's been oppressing his people. And ultimately, that's why Jesus gives the response that he does. Jesus says this, "Put your sword back in its place," verse 52. "For all who draw the sword will die by the sword." And it's this image that Jesus gives us. And it's, on one level, it's the image of an outlaw who has lived his life robbing banks and shooting people and then eventually dies by a gunshot. And it's just poetic justice. It's the image of Inigo Montoya from The Princess Bride saying, "My name is Inigo Montoya, you killed my father, prepare to die." And he swings, and it's, oh, this is the person who is, yeah, I know my accent was terrible there. This is the person who has killed my father with his sword, and now he's going to die with a sword. And Jesus is saying, yeah, there's a sense of poetic justice in the world, but it's more than that. If you're the kind of person who lives by violence, you're the kind of person who responds, who contributes to the cloud of hate that we all live in, that will slowly kill you, one way or another. What Jesus is describing is not just the way that very often our actions have consequences that come back to us, but the ways that we are not living the full life that Jesus has to offer us if we're responding with violence. Because what Jesus is saying is, in my kingdom, there's a different way. When someone makes you mad, or when someone frustrates you, when someone comes at you with violence, this is how I live. And then Jesus responds with something else. It reminds me of this quote. A lot of people know the name of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he did so much for civil rights in America. And many people know about his I Have a Dream speech that took place in the 60s in Washington, D.C. Not as many people know about a sermon that he gave in 1957, years before. You can trace Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., his philosophy on the world. You can trace it back to his roots as a follower of Jesus and as a pastor of a church and a reverend. Listen to this. This is what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. says about loving your enemies and how the way of Jesus is different. He says, "Returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars." Catch this. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Peter's sword is not long enough to strike at what the real problem is. The real problem is the envy that the religious leaders feel toward Jesus. The real problem is that they want to abuse their power over people. The real problem is the greed that Judas has, who's betraying them. And very often, we end up hurting people who are just in the way. Maybe two parents are arguing, and they want to hurt each other, and they really end up hurting their kids at the time. Or maybe you're in a circle of friends, and you are angry at your friend, and you lash out at them, and you end up destroying these other people's friendships along the way. Hate has unintended consequences, and ultimately just leads to a cycle of hate, is what Jesus is trying to communicate. What Jesus is saying is, there's a better way. And there's a better way that Jesus lives out for us. And that reminds me of there's a scene, I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Cinderella Man. It's based on a boxer in the Great Depression, played by Russell Crowe, so you know it's a great movie. And there was a historical boxer named James J. Braddock, who fought during the Great Depression and was a real symbol for the American people. He had a friend who wanted to say, I want to overthrow the government. I'm so mad at the president. I'm so mad at America. And Russell Crowe responds, what do you want to fight? Greed that led to the stock market collapsing? Drought that led to the Dust Bowl? I can't swing at that. He's just happy that he's a boxer and he knows someone he can swing at. The point is that when we strike out, we don't even strike out at the root of the problem. The only way to deal with the root of the problem is to choose healing over hurting, which leads us to Jesus' point here. In Matthew later on, so we've just made it to verse 53. So he says, put your sword back in its place, for all who live by the sword die by the sword. Do you not think I can call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? Jesus is saying, I can have 24,000 swords here. I don't need you to defend me, Peter. I'm in control in this moment. It's not about whether Jesus can strike out in violence. It's not even about whether he has the right to strike out in violence. And it's not whether these people deserve to strike out in violence. If anyone deserves to get stabbed right now, it's Judas the backstabber. But it's not about that. And for us, it's not about what I deserve. It's not about what they deserve. It's about healing. Which is why in the Gospel of Luke, Luke records this. Jesus at that moment says in Luke chapter 22, Jesus says, enough of this. Enough of this cycle. Enough of the hate leading to hate and violence leading to violence. Enough of that. And Jesus reaches out. This is in Luke chapter 22. Jesus reaches out. He touches the man's ear and he heals him. Right there in front of the crowd with the swords and the clubs who's coming to crucify Jesus, Jesus stops and he heals this person. To show Peter, to show the disciples, hey, my mission is about bringing healing and taking the suffering and pain of the world into myself. Jesus chooses healing over hurting. It's this powerful moment. And I know many of us are thinking, okay, well, what does this have to do with me? I'm not someone who can just pick up someone's hairy, waxy ear off of the ground and put it back on their head. I'm not Jesus. Jesus is giving us an example. Because in the same way that Jesus would go to the cross and give his life for his enemies, for the same people who hated him, who spit on him, who put him there, Jesus challenges us to follow his example, to choose healing instead of hurting. And so for us, Jesus wants to break this pattern in this cycle in our lives. I think it's so evident. Have you ever, I don't know if you're not a parent, if you've babysat kids for 2 minutes, you understand this. Have you ever had two kids get in an argument, and then suddenly, when you got to ask, oh, what happened? Or one of them runs to you, mommy, this happened. Or if you're Uncle Matt, this happened. He hit me, or she hit me. And then what they're not telling you is that, well, before that, I said this, or I hit them. And then the other kid comes over, and they're trying to explain, and it's difficult. And you just realize, I don't know how I'm going to dig to the bottom of this, but I know that I can't let it continue to spiral on by telling this kid, oh, go ahead and whack them again then. We'll see what happens. No, at that moment, you say, I don't care what has happened. I want to end the cycle. And for us, when we're deciding to choose healing over hurting, I think we're not talking about the challenge of forgiveness, the boundaries of forgiveness, how difficult forgiveness is for us this week. But maybe the first step for you is going to be telling someone who's uninvolved in the situation about the anger that you have. Just saying, I hate this person for what they did. I hate that professor for how they humiliated me in front of the class. I hate that coworker for how they belittled me in front of my boss. I hate my boss for how they're unappreciative of everything that I do. I hate my brother for what he did to me. I hate that person. Just saying that out loud to someone else, and then saying, I know that Jesus wants me to choose healing, and I can't right now. Just saying that out loud to someone. And then the challenge for us is to extend some kind of peace offering. So I don't know if for you that's going to be writing a text to a family member you haven't spoken to in a long time, writing a note to someone, taking someone out for a meal, But the point is that when we choose healing over hurting, it's not natural. It's supernatural. And it's the way of Jesus. Jesus frees us from being chained to our rights, our way, what we deserve. And Jesus frees us to live a whole new life where people don't have that kind of control over us. And so that's our challenge. And what I want to ask is, what would our families look like if we had that kind of reconciliation? What would our marriages look like? What would our friendships look like? What would it look like at school, at work, for us to forgive people? For us, when the next time someone makes a snide remark, the next time someone calls us out in front of people, the next time someone hurts us, to choose healing instead of hurting.